Right, so here we have an example. So here we have a transcript. Let us read this and try to do an IPA on this. Right, so the first sentence, and we'll try to make notes as we go along. So the first sentence is, I'm on a train, or that's how I feel. Excited, alive, elated, and a little out of control. On the edge of control, like riding on a wave. Also hungry for experiences and impressions, and seemingly insatiable. I thought about manic states and how people say they feel like Napoleon. And I thought, no, I don't want to rule the world. I just want to eat it. The other day, I read something interesting about different stages in life. It said that in one's youth, everything is still possible. Opportunities arise and can be taken up. Later in life, one learns to accept the place one has arrived at and makes the most of it. That sounds about right to me. I don't want to plan ahead or commit myself to anything in the long term because I want to be able to respond to new opportunities and challenges which I expect to encounter. For me, there has to be movement all the time. I feel that I'm moving forward and changing. I need to feel free to change. Not to be pulled along by change, but to move with it. Freedom and control together. The freedom to respond to events and influences so as to change in a way which is acceptable to me. Now, if you were to make comments or notes on this, how would you do it? So, in order to do that, let's read it again. What are some of your thoughts when you read this? I'm on a train, or that's how I feel. Excited, alive, elated, and a little out of control. On the edge of control, like riding on a wave. Now, this basically, it seems to be, very vivid imagery that the writer is using, right, to explain how they feel, right? And then they say, I thought about manic states and how people say they feel like Napoleon. So they also are making use of psychological terms like mania, right? And I thought, no, I don't want to rule the world. I just want to eat it. The other day, I read something interesting about different stages in life. So, again, the writer is talking about stages in life, perhaps, again, talking about something psychological. I said that in one's youth, everything is still possible and opportunities arise and can be taken up. Later in life, one learns to accept the place one has. Now, there's also a difference between how this started out. So this is very vivid. The writer is saying, I just want to eat the world, right? I am on a train. So now their writing seems to be getting a little bit more sober as they're moving along. The place one has arrived at and makes the most out of it. That sounds about right to me. I don't want to plan ahead or commit myself. So again, the writer talks about how they do not want commitment, right? Because they want to respond to new opportunities and challenges, right? For them, there has to be movement all the time, right? And they want to feel free. So that's something that's running through this. And they want something like control that they can, change, or they can, they can sort of steer the direction of the changes in a way that is acceptable to them, right? So yes, all of these different comments you can talk about. Now, some of these comments are more descriptive comments. Like, for example, the comments in which you say that they are, it's becoming more sober as the text moves along, right? Or when you're saying that they're talking about commitment and control, and, they don't want to commit. Not wanting commitment, right? And wanting to feel free, right? So these are more descriptive in the sense that they're telling you what is going on within the text, whereas when we're talking about how they're using psychological terms and vivid imagery, these are more linguistic comments, right? More conceptual comments would be something like, looking at the context in which they're talking. So they're talking about different life stages. They're talking about how, they are, sort of struggling between wanting change all the time versus control, right? So that would be more of a conceptual comment. Right, so this is stage one of your analysis, in which you're reading the text and you're trying to make certain notes about it, right? Now, what is the next stage? The next stage would be that you try to identify different themes. Now, what themes could you identify here? Let's look at it one more time. So, let's talk about emergent themes. So they say, I'm on a train, or that's how I feel. Excited, alive, elated, and a little out of control. On the edge of control. Now, they talk about control a lot, right? They talk about it here, and then it seems to be a pattern in which they're talking about control. And then here as well, there is control. So there's freedom and control here, right? So this wanting to control, or this need to control, you can talk about, the lines in which you have, or, not even wish to control, you can just talk about control, because they talk about, being on the edge of it as well, right? So you can refer back and talk about how they feel out of control or edge of control, right? So out of, edge of, right? And these are in line number 2, right? So you just write line 2 here, and then you can talk about it here as well. Freedom and control, they talk about it here as well, and this is line 14. So freedom plus control, and this is line 14, right? So control can be one theme, right? What could be other themes? So again, let's go back and look at it. When we look at these words, excited, alive, elated, and a little out of control, like riding on a wave, hungry for experience. So, this is, so they're using, we've talked about this in the notes as well, that there's a lot of vivid imagery. I think one of the things that you get from the text is that there are a lot of strong feelings, right? Of, there's strong feelings of arousal, there's excitement, there's strong feelings of arousal, there's excitement, there is wanting movement all the time, right? There's feelings of hunger, right? So, there's that as well. There's very strong feelings that this person seems to be putting out here. Right, so if we were to just say strong feelings here and talk about lines, right, let's just talk about arousal and hunger, right? Let's just say line, what line is it? Right, 1 to 3, right? So line 1 to 3. And then when there's for movement, so that again we can talk about what line that is. 12, right? So we noted this down here. Now, what other themes could be possible? One of those could be, the psychological terms that this person is using. So that can also be a theme. So they're, for example, talking about manic states, right? They're talking about stages of life, right? And then you can refer back and write down the lines here. Right. Sorry. What other themes could there be? let's move back and let's talk about some other. Right, then you also seem to have, hungry for experiences and impressions and seemingly insatiable. Right? So again, you have hungry, right, for experiences or what was it? Impressions, also movement, right? And then you can also talk about what line it's here. Then there's also this very strong need for movement, right? And the author talks about here, I need to feel free to change, right? So the need to feel free is also there. So need to be free or need for freedom. Now this was basically stage 3, in which what you're doing is that you're trying to look at, this is stage 2, in which you're trying to have some emergent themes. Then with stage 3, what you do is that you try to draw up something like a cluster table. Now what exactly is a cluster table? A cluster table is something that gives organization to your different themes, right? So you can look at these different different themes that you have and look at what could be relationships between these. Are there any ways in which you could cluster them together, right? So one of the things that you could look at was, this person is talking about psychological states, right? They're talking about mania, right? And they're also talking about strong feelings. So could that be one cluster of theme which you sort of identify as psychological states, right? Now that could be your cluster. And the themes under this could look something like this. They could form, when this person is talking about mania, or what we termed psychological terms here, right? So let's right, so psychological terms, right? So we named this here, and we talked about how stages of life was one of the things that they talk about. Stages of life could also be another theme, right? But when we talk about psychological states, so we could talk about the psychological terms that they use, or the psychological language that they're using, right? Or wanting or talking about stages of life, right? And mania, right? And it could also be the strong feelings that they talk about, right? So that could be one cluster. And then whenever you're putting together these themes, you just put the lines in front of them. So whatever line this is mentioned in, you just mention that line. This is how you come up with a cluster. Now, could you have any other clusters with these themes? So, one could be, another could be needs, right? If we have the cluster of needs, we can put these 3 together actually, right? So another cluster can be something that we call needs, and we put hunger here, hungry, and we have the line numbers here. Then we have need for movement, right? Need for freedom, right? So basically this is how we make clusters of themes, right? And this is what you present as well in a paper, these clusters of themes, right? This is for this is when you're doing one, and we have only one theme left, which is control, and that can be a cluster in its own right. So basically we were able to develop 3 different clusters from the themes that we've developed, right? So this is how you do IPA. When you're doing multiple cases, then your cluster, your clusters of themes look slightly different as well. But yes, what do they look like in that context? Let me just show you quickly. So before I show you how we do 2 different cases, let me just show you neater versions of what we've just done. So look, this is the first cluster, which is psychological states, right? Within that you have the theme of psychopathology, in which they're talking about manic states. Then you have the theme of life stages, when they're talking about youth versus later in life. And then you have the theme of strong feelings, when they're using words like excited, alive, elated, hungry, right? And then you have the relevant line numbers here. Similarly, for cluster 2 and 3, here you have needs, right? And you have hunger, movement, freedom. So insatiable hunger is in line 3 to 5. Movement, there has to be movement, line 12 and 3. Freedom, I need to feel free to change, lines 10 to 13. Then you have the third cluster here, in which you're talking about control. So there's loss of control, freedom, and control. So there's line 2 and lines 14 and 16 here. So this is basically what a cluster of themes looks like. Let me show you what it looks like when you have 2 different cases. What I mean when I say 2 different cases is that usually you're analyzing more than one transcript, and sometimes you're analyzing more than the transcripts of, like, let's say 3 people. So then you have something like this. So you have a master theme, right? And you have the constituent theme page, right? And then you have line numbers for each of these 3 different participants, right? So you have the theme here, and then you have the page numbers for all 3 of these participants, right? So this is what it looks like when you're doing it for 3 different participants. I hope that makes some sense and gives you some idea of what IPA is about. I will provide a sample paper on IPA as well, so make sure that you go through that. Thank you.